Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Do you know, for over 300 years, entire coastal areas, people lived in fear. Men, women and children had vanished from the beaches of England, Ireland, Spain, Italy, and would you believe as far north as Iceland. Some estimates reckon that it was over 1 million Europeans were enslaved. Yet today, few people have ever heard of the Barbary Pirates, yet alone who they were or where they operated from. So let's take a look at the Barbary Pirates, the Corsairs. So who were these Corsairs, these Barbary Pirates? They were Turks, Arabs, North Africans, even sub-Saharan Arabs would move up to the coast and be part of the Barbary Pirates. They operated out of ports in the North African coast, Algiers, Tunisia, Libya, Morocco. They were, in the beginning, just independent pirates. They would sail out, intercept trading ships, merchant vessels, rob them, and bring their stuff back. But they also became sponsored by their local sultans or pashas. And they really did begin to dominate the seaways of the Mediterranean and just going out into the Atlantic. This was at the end of Queen Elizabeth I's reign, the late 16th century, the late 1500s, and they would really dominate the seaways. But when the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, conquered North Africa, all of those countries except Morocco, which remained independent, things would change dramatically. They would become organised and deadly. So these Barbary pirates, they were not just after merchant ships on the high seas to get the gold and the treasure. These were slavers. This is the story of a forgotten slave trade. So these men, these pirates, would attack a merchant vessel, rob it blind, may even capture the ship, but they would enslave the crew. But that wasn't their biggest profit. It was the coastal villages that they would attack. You see, they would attack them in the middle of the night, enslave the local population, and then transport them back to Algiers or Morocco to be sold on the block. And it's interesting, I've been reading about these pirates. On their return journeys from wherever they went, they had to resupply with victuals and water. They knew the best places to go, the best inlets where they could moor up for the night and be safe. They knew that they had to get their slaves off ship, exercise them, water them, and feed them. Otherwise, they'll die and they will lose profit. These are no longer human beings. They're actually a commodity, aren't they? These slaves, these enslaved people are worth money. The most infamous village attack had to be the one at Baltimore in Southern Ireland, County Cork. It's on the 20th of June, 1631. That shows you how early on in history this was going on. There are 107 villagers at Baltimore were enslaved, but some say it was actually as high as 237. Now, the people of Baltimore, some were English settlers, others were local Irish, and they had a fish processing plant actually in the village. They were a successful little community, but they were betrayed by a local fisherman, John Hackett. He in turn had been captured by the Barbary pirates, who had questioned and tortured him as to whether the village of Baltimore was defended, and in return for his assistance, John Hackett was given his freedom. Later on, Hackett will be hanged on the cliffside outside the village for conspiracy. Now, the crew that attacked Baltimore were not led by a Turk or Arab. They were led by a Dutch captain, Jan Janzoen van Haarlem. He'd been captured by the Barbary pirates and had converted to Islam and became a pirate in his own right and was known as Murad Reis the Younger. His crew was made up of European renegades, as they were called, as well as Algerians. So you imagine then, you're a member of the Society of Baltimore, you've got quite a nice job, your husband might be a fisherman, or you might work at the processing plant. You've bedded your children down, everything is nice, and you cuddle up with your husband and you fall asleep. And in the night, a neighbour bangs on the door. They can smell smoke. So you open the door, maybe you're just still in your nightgown, and standing in front of you is a massive Arab soldier with a great big sword. You will be terrified. He will have you out of your house with your children and onto the street. Maybe your husband has run out ahead of you, and then you see his decapitated body on the floor. You see two of the men at Baltimore fought back and paid for it with their lives. In no time at all, houses are being ransacked, and all of your community, everybody you know, is being filed out. As you get down to the beach, there are more and more of these Arab-looking soldiers. They're not friendly, but they're not panicking you. The women and children are put onto the larger ship. There are two vessels, and the men onto another. Some slaves are already on board the ship where these Barbary pirates had captured small vessels on the way. Now, what they will do is they will sail back across the channel. Can you imagine the fear with all of you down in the bottom, the dark hold of this ship? When you get across to the other side, maybe the French coast, they will pull in at an inlet. They will take stock. They will feed you. They will water you. But as they move down the coast to northern Spain and Portugal, they will need to be very careful because there will be enemy ships. They will fire on you. So these Barbary pirates, they really did know what they were doing. Also, when they pulled in to resupply and victual, they would send some of their soldiers inland to see if they can raid any more villages for a little bit of profit in money, silver maybe, a church. But their main one, as I said, is enslaving the local people. Eventually, you arrive at Algiers. As you get off the ship, you're not put up for sale straight away. And the girls particularly, it'll suddenly dawn on them what's happening. The men are separate. You might see them over there. They're in chains. But now you're going to be fed, you're going to be washed, and you're going to be given simple but clean clothing. They want you presentable. Now, if you're one of the men from Baltimore, you might be a blacksmith. You might be a sailmaker. You may have a trade, a mariner or something that the Arabs will find useful. You will fetch top dollar, shall we say. If you're not one of these men, if you are just a fisherman, you're going to be sold as a galley slave. Now, the galleys, these ships that they had, they were powered by oar, as well as some small sails. You might have 5 or 6 men on one oar. You'll be taken down into the galley. You'll be chained to your position at the oar. And that's where you will stay for the rest of your life. You will eat, drink, work, defecate in that one place. The life of a galley slave was hell on earth, and it didn't last long. If you're a big, meaty looking kind of a guy with muscles but still have no trade, you might go to work in one of the quarries that were in North Africa. You could be sold and then you'll be worked to death. If you're a woman, if you're older, you might be put in as a domestic slave. If you were pretty, if you were attractive, you're going to be sold into a harem. Your harem, is it they call them? Just use your imagination how the rest of your life will be spent. But if you're a seamstress, or if you're clever, you might find that you are sold into a trade. And then, maybe later on, you can convert to Islam. You may even marry and settle into a new life. Do you know, out of all those people that were taken, enslaved in Baltimore, I think it was only 3 who ever returned. One of the advantages that the Barbary pirates had over other navies was the ships they used. They had galleys to start off with. Now that is an oar-powered ship, so you've got banks of men rowing away, hence the need for galley slaves. Some of these large galleys, they didn't have masts down the centre. There was space there for goods or enslaved people. But they also had the xebec. That's a very fast ship. It's narrow in the beam, quite long, shallow drafted. These had oar power and some sail power, so they could really go some. Over time, as these xebecs developed, their design changed. They removed many of the oars, replacing them with guns, reducing the amount of rowers on board, enabling the xebecs to fire a broadside. Interestingly, though, with the galley is you can't put cannons down the side because the oars are in the way. So they can have 4 guns. chasers in the front of the fore half of the ship, and then your stern guns at the back. Now, think about this. This is quite an interesting thing. So if you've got a ship that has cannons at the back and it fires, in those days, the recoil wasn't like in Napoleon's time. So the gun, if it fires, it's fixed to the ship. If it's fixed to the stern of the ship, it just pushes the ship along. But if you've got guns down the side of a ship and they don't recoil, then the ship does this. It rolls. It puts strain on the ship. But these galleys, it didn't. If you fired the fore guns, it pushed the ship back a little bit. If you fired from the rear, it pushed you forward. That meant they could have, especially at the stern of these galleys, they could have some heavy old guns. So if you're in your galleon, your lovely ship, and you're a Frenchman and you're bearing down on one of these galleys, you could suddenly find that you're under fire from behind with heavier caliber guns. Now, because these ships that the Barbary Pirates used were shallow drafted, they were coastal traders. Coastal pirates. They went along the coast. They hugged the coast, nip along the Straits of Gibraltar and then around Portugal, northern Spain, nip across the channel at a narrow point and you're onto the south of England, come all the way around, nip across and you're into southern Ireland, skirt the coast of southern Ireland to the west of Ireland, and then if you're good enough, you can do another leap and you're in Iceland. Frightening, isn't it? Because in Iceland in the summer of 1627, there was a series of raids by the Barbary Pirates that resulted in dozens of Icelanders being killed and over 400 abducted and enslaved. No one was safe. Now, apart from having these good ships and good sailors, because they did have a lot of foreigners in their navies, they had an intelligence network. They didn't just go blindly out to sea and let's see what we can find. They really did know what was going on. And there's an interesting thing here. There were lots of empires, I suppose you'd call them, or city-states, especially in Italy, like Florence and Venice. And they would fight back. And they had their own slave trade. So whilst you've got the North Africans, the Muslims there, taking slaves from around the coast, you've also got Muslims being enslaved by these city-states. And there's another part here. I'm going to mention this now. And that's the North African states would actually send slaving expeditions down through the Sahara into sub-Saharan Africa. And there they would raid villages and enslave the local people and bring them back. So when you look at the Barbary Pirates, they're not just enslaving white Europeans. They're enslaving black Africans. And that black African part, the Arab slave trade, while all of this is going on, it's also the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, that horror. And if you compare the two, which I don't really want to do, but it has to be said. So if there were over 1 million white Europeans enslaved over 300 years, I understand that for the transatlantic slave trade, 10 million Africans stolen from their homes and transported to the plantations. It's a horror story, isn't it? But the common denominator you've got in all of this, the Barbary Pirates, the African slave trade, is the slave traders themselves. They were Arabs. But that's not quite true, is it? If you look at the transatlantic slave trade, all those poor Africans torn from their homes, you have Arab traders, yeah, but also your African chiefs and their men who are complicit. And then, of course, at the coast, the slaves are sold to European captains who would then transport them across to Virginia or whether to Havana, and they would be sold then to the plantations. See, there's more to this than meets the eye, isn't it? And if you go back to the Barbary Pirates, many of the Barbary Pirates were actually Europeans. Some had been captured, converted to Islam, and then had turned their hand at the Barbary pirate trade. They were slavers. But some of them volunteered to become pirates. They saw the profit there was in enslaving other people. So they converted to Islam and became Barbary pirates. That's just it, isn't it? What man will do to turn a coin. But we've been talking about historical slavery. But in fact, slavery goes on to this very day. People are enslaved. North Africa, Central Africa. In fact, in many countries throughout the world, including Europe, people are enslaved. And all for that one thing, profit. I find it interesting on how efficient these Barbary pirates were. So if you take them on board ship, your galley slaves were your oar power, your sailors who ran the ship were your wind power, but then you had your gunners and your really professional sailors, mariners who could navigate. On top of all of this, so you got this very efficient, shallow-drafted ship that can get right inland. You also had your soldiers that were on board. Now, once the Ottoman Empire had joined in properly, you had your janissaries. These were, in the beginning, they were the sultan's or the pasha's personal bodyguard. They were bred for that job. Well, that continued on and expanded. So on board ship, you can have these janissaries in their red tunics and their fezzes with these great big enormous swords. Terrifying, but they were professional soldiers. So you get inland to a village, you send the soldiers in first. They will do the surrounding of the village, the burning, the capturing. Then they will help bring the captives, the enslaved people, back down to the ship. So it was a system. And as I mentioned before, these sea captains knew where to get fresh water, where to get supplies. And when they got back to their home port, which could be Morocco if they were independent, Algiers if they were working for the Ottoman Empire, they would then bring their ship in and it would be unloaded to a system. As I've said before, the slaves will be cleaned, they will be well fed, they will be looked after. They want to be presented as best as they can. Now, once they were sold, you've got then the division of the profits. So the Sultan, way back in Turkey, he will have his cut. Then your local pasha will have his cut. Then your investors will have their cut. Then your crew will have their cut. And of course, you will have your share as the captain. But something I learned about these captains, they were good. So they didn't immediately then go out on the town. They needed to refit the ship, make it seaworthy again, even have the hull dragged up onto the sand and cleaned. Then it's put back to sea, it's revictualled and rearmed and ready to go out. Then he will take his little bit of profit from it. It wasn't the case as these were ragged pirates, not at all. They were well organised and the system worked. And because Europe was not united, they could get away with literally murder because some of their raids often went wrong. When you look at these Barbary pirates, although they were slave traders and pirates and all of that, they were also at war because all of the states around the Mediterranean and Britain, of course, if they captured any of these Barbary pirates, they would be put to death almost immediately, even tortured. Some of them may have actually been enslaved. So they were always ready to be on the offensive as well as the defensive. They're looking out for places to attack, watching out for the enemy ships. It's quite a story, but when you look at the sheer amount of people that they could capture at any one time, it's mind-blowing. And what it showed me is, although the attack on Baltimore was just 2 of the Barbary Pirates ships, some of the other raids were enormous. So it must have been a fleet of galleys. So let's just have a look at some of the numbers that we know from the early part, the 1500s, of the attacks by the Barbary pirates. 1544, a pirate called Hayrettin Barbaros. He was actually one of the Barbarossa brothers from the eastern Mediterranean, may have been part Greek, so I understand. He was a very efficient but ruthless Barbary pirate. He attacked the island of Ischia, captured 4,000 people, enslaved them, and also between 2,000 and 7,000 inhabitants of the island of Lipari, which is in the Bay of Naples. It shows you how close to the coast. They really were. Another nasty pirate, Turgot Rees, in 1551 enslaved the entire population of the Maltese island of Gozo. That's up to 6,000 people, left the island empty. But in 1554, Turgot Rees sacked the Italian coastal town of Vieste. And it turned nasty here. Although he enslaved 6,000 of the inhabitants, he decapitated or had decapitated 5,000 others. 5,000 people were beheaded because they didn't have room for them on the ships. Barbarism, man at his worst. One of the most notorious of the Barbary pirates was John Ward, Jack to his friends. He was an Englishman. During the latter part of Queen Elizabeth's reign, he had been one of the privateers in her navy. He knew all about piracy. He had sailed the seven seas, was quite a mariner. In fact, this common man had made his way all the way up through the ranks to captain. He captained his own ship. But there was a new thing that was coming into the navy. Apprentices, rich men could actually put their youngest son as an apprentice and they would get qualified and go up the ladder to captain. So when things relaxed with warfare on the high seas under James I, there was no need for the like of Jack. He found himself redundant. He tried his hand at being just a common seafaring lad, but he couldn't take it, all the orders and so on and so forth. So he became more and more irregular around the pubs of Plymouth. But he had a wife. He got to support his family. So he come up with an idea. He got his crewmates together and they stole a ship. And they sailed to Algiers, where they were captured and put into prison. But he very quickly persuaded the Sultan there that these men had come to serve as Barbary pirates. John Ward converted to Islam, formed his crew, and they became a Barbary pirate. In fact, he was so successful, he ended up with his own mansion house, apparently. He never forgot his wife back in England. He sent money to her and occasional gifts. He would end his days actually on land. He would die of the plague. But there's one thing that he did that was important to the Barbary pirates. He modernized the way they operated their ships. He brought his skill to the Barbary pirates of basically being a bit of a master mariner. John Ward, just as ruthless as all of the others, at the end of the day, he was a pirate and a slaver. So what about the victims then, these enslaved poor folks? If you were of money, you could let them know and you could be ransomed and spend your time in prison while you're waiting for your ransom to be paid. Or you might be lucky enough to be ransomed by one of the religious sects that were trying to get people back. There was lots going on. There was even Knights Templar types who were fighting the Barbary pirates. But some of the stories of those who escaped or were released are quite incredible. And one of the most famous ones is Thomas Pellow of Penryn in Cornwall, 1716. An 11-year-old boy, he was on board a boat. His uncle was the captain. They were captured by Barbary pirates from the independent state of Morocco. And he was not sold, he was given to the Sultan Moulay Ismail, the Sultan of Morocco, who then gave the poor lad Thomas to the Sultan's son, who tortured him. They used to have this thing where they turned you upside down and beat the soles of your feet. It's horrible. But this young lad survived. In fact, there was one case where the Sultan ordered his son to bring Thomas to him, but his son disobeyed him and was executed for it on the spot. But what happened to Thomas is quite something. He converted to Islam. He had to. They were torturing him. He was very intelligent and became a soldier for the Sultan. In fact, he became a captain of the soldiers. He saw action fighting as a soldier for the Moroccan independent state. But in October 1738, at the age of 34, he managed to return to his homeland, to Penryn. You see, what he did was he escaped. It was his third escape attempt. And when he returned home, there was a hero's welcome for him. But the problem he had, he didn't know anybody in Penryn. He just about recognised his mum and dad. They didn't recognise him because now he had heavily tanned skin and a full beard. So he settled down and he wrote a book, a bit of a bestseller, so I understand. The History of the Long Captivity and Adventures of Thomas Pellow. So there you have it. One of those poor enslaved people. He actually weathered the storm and eventually he returned home. A rare account of a ransomed enslaved person was that of Elizabeth Marsh. She was the daughter of a naval officer, and en route from Gibraltar to England, their ship got into trouble, 1756, and it was intercepted by Moroccan Barbary pirates. She, at the time, was 20 years of age, rather attractive, and was going home to her fiancé. Now being captured, she was obviously terrified, and being a young, attractive white woman was in great danger. So she pretended to be married to one of the other captives, James Crisp, who went along with this falsehood. She firmly resisted the attentions, now read between the lines, of a Moroccan prince. She stuck to her guns. Now 4 months later, she was ransomed along with James Crisp, who afterwards she actually married, and then there is a long story of their lives. Interestingly, Elizabeth also wrote a book about her captivity. It was called The Female Captive. And it's interesting when you read parts of it, how she talks about the men, how brutally they were treated, torture, being worked to death. Conditions were far worse than those of the women. Because the women captives, of course, will be absorbed two ways, either into the harem of the sultans, when, of course, their future, their bodies weren't their own. So I'll leave that to your imagination. The other side is you could be absorbed into a domestic servant, a domestic household. And if you converted to Islam, you would then find yourself with a new husband and a totally, completely different life. So the two paths separated. And even as a concubine, as they call it, you would still have comfort. But of course, your body simply would not be your own. So for 300 years, these Barbary pirates had been in action. And the damage they caused. Areas of countries, the coastlines being depopulated, fishing industry destroyed, merchant vessels lost. It was costing an absolute fortune. And another thing you could do was you could pay off the Barbary pirates and they would leave you alone. But the United States, 1776, they gained their independence. Their ships were being attacked, so the United States government have to pay for protection, if you want it. And it cost them an absolute fortune. But it doesn't mean to say if you pay the Moroccans X amount of money to not attack your ships, the Algerians might attack your ships. In the end, the European navies were getting stronger and were fighting back, and those of the United States were getting stronger, and they went to war against the Barbary pirates. But what actually stopped this piracy, really, in its tracks, was the French invasion of Algeria. Once that was conquered, bang, it puts a stop to this piracy in the Mediterranean. Or did it? You know, nowadays when you mention pirates, people think of Treasure Island or Pirates of the Caribbean. But the reality was different. Those Barbary pirates, they instilled absolute fear all around the Mediterranean and the south coast of England and Ireland. They left behind devastation. Coastal areas depopulated, families enslaved, communities shattered. You know, it's a forgotten part of history that actually deserves to be remembered. It was a dark chapter, and that's for sure. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, like, share, and subscribe. And just to let you know, this was a Patreon voted for video. And if you'd like to support our channel further by joining our Patreon community, the link is in the description. Now, before I go, a quick shout out to some of my Patreon members. Some of these names are great. So thanks a million, guys. Zombie, Jeanette 606, and Charles Ray. Hey, guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.